13. Thank you, Charlie. The Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you mourn for Saul, since I have rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I am sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I have chosen one of his sons to be king." But Samuel said, "How can I go? If Saul hears about it, he will kill me." The Lord said, "Take a heifer with you and say, I've come to sacrifice for the Lord. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what to do. You are to anoint for me the one that I indicate." Samuel did what the Lord said. When he arrived at Bethlehem, the elders of the town trembled when they met him. They asked, "Do you come in peace?" Samuel replied, "Yes, in peace. I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come to the sacrifice with me." Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When they arrived, Samuel saw and I'm sorry, I wish I had taken a course in how to pronounce some of these biblical names. So I'm going to do the best I can, but bear with me. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things that people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." Then Jesse called Abinadab and had him pass in front of Samuel. But Samuel said, "No, the Lord has not chosen this one either." Jesse then had Shammah pass by, but Samuel said, "No, nor has the Lord chosen this one." Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, but Samuel said to him, "The Lord has not chosen these." So he asked Jesse, "Are these all the sons you have?" "Well, there is still the youngest," Jesse answered. "He is tending the sheep." Samuel said, "Send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives." So he sent for him and had him brought in. He was glowing with health and had a fine appearance and handsome features. And then the Lord said, "Rise and anoint him. This is the one." So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers, and from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. When I was a young girl, my aunt and I were debating over what words were bad and what words were okay. She was cussing like a sailor around me, and I was lecturing her. And yes, she's my elder, but I was lecturing her on words that were better to say than the ones she chose to use. My grandpa, her dad, was a minister and my spiritual mentor. In fact, his name was Jesse. But he told us it doesn't really matter what words we used. What matters most was what was in our heart when we used those words. Now, as a youngster, that reply was very impactful to me. As an adult, I see the way that people speak very differently. And now, as people confide in me as their pastor or talk to me as their pastor, my heart breaks as I realize the truth of what is really, truly in their hearts. Back in the Old Testament, there was a very big significance to the birth order of your children. In the Hebrew language, the term youngest not only meant the last born, but also meant the lowest in rank. The youngest would feel the unfairness of life and see that the firstborn got all of the privileges. Think about this just for a second. We're going through your photo albums. You show me your firstborn. Here's when little Sally was born. Here she is at 2 days old. Here she is with her grandparents. Here she is when she gets home from the hospital. You get the idea. Now, Andy here, he's our second born. Here is his first smile. Here is his first birthday. Here's our third child. This is when he was born. Here he is on his 10th birthday. You get that. A fascinating thread runs through the Old Testament, having to do with the reversal of birth order and the rights that normally came with the firstborn son among the people of Israel. Ishmael was the first son born to Abraham, but God chose Isaac. Esau, a twin, came out of the womb first, But God decided to continue the line of the patriarchs through his younger twin brother Jacob. Jacob's son Joseph had 10 older brothers, but he was chosen to become king of Israel. What is God saying through these significant reversals? I'm a firstborn myself, so be careful how you tread. In those days, firstborns got all the rights. They got all the property, all of the privileges. But God broke into cultural practices and did something new. Limitations and boundaries about who counts and who doesn't don't apply anymore. In light of God's power at work in our lives and the world, birth order is really not that big of a deal. Verse 6 says, when they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and thought, surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at, the Lord does not look at things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. David wrote in Psalm 17, you have tried my heart. You have visited me by night. You have tested me, and you will find nothing. I have purposed that my mouth will not transgress. With regard to the works of man, by the word of your lips, I have avoided the ways of the violent. My steps have held fast to your paths. My feet have not slipped. I call upon you, for you will answer me. O God, incline your ear to me, hear my words. Wondrously show your steadfast love. O Savior of those who seek refuge from their adversaries at your right hand, keep me as the apple of your eye. Hide me in the shadow of your wings. When I read that passage for the first time years ago, I prayed that I would also be the apple of God's eye. I know that sounds like a big prayer, but that's how I felt. I wanted him to find favor with me and think of me as one of his favorites. I knew that David was one of God's favorites. I can be too. But why? Why was David a favorite? David had a wild heart for the Lord. His heart was fully committed to the Lord. In Psalm 9, verse 1, David said, I will praise you, O Lord, with all of my heart. I will tell of your wonders. David had an unguarded passion and heart for the Lord that he never held back. He was generous and free. Have you ever seen someone who was so happy that they couldn't contain themselves? They squeal and they jump up and down. I have a student who, when he gets on the swing, he squeals so loudly and his face brightens up the whole playground. This is what David's heart looks like. David's heart was also characterized by deep reflection. In Psalm 139, David writes, search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious heart. It is rare to find someone who is committed to passionate action on one hand and such deep reflection on the other. But David was that man. David's heart was deep and reflective. He spent a lot of time alone. When he was a kid, he tended sheep. This provided lots of quiet time. After Samuel arrived and anointed David as king, he didn't just march into Jerusalem, declare himself king, and sit on the throne. He had time to wait. So he goes back out and he tends his sheep. Time in the wilderness was not wasted. He was learning to be alone with God. David's heart was also characterized right down to the core by stubborn love. Thank you so much. That cottonwood out there does a nasty job on my allergies. In Psalm 78, we read that David shepherded the people with integrity of heart. The idea is that his heart was undivided. It's the opposite of fickle. He loved people with the loyal heart of a shepherd who kept loving his sheep even when they were being difficult. Let's look at how David loved Saul even when it was hard. King Saul had become increasingly corrupt and tormented by jealousy of David. Saul was constantly, deceiving David, and on many occasions tried to kill him. What is amazing is that David could have killed Saul and would have been justified in most people's eyes, but he refused to do it. In fact, when Saul died, David wrote a beautiful poem as a lament for him. He wrote, "Oh, how the mighty have fallen. Daughters of Israel, weep for Saul." David knew Saul's faults, and he still chose to love him. When was the last time that you were so full of gratitude to God that you jumped up and down? When was the last time that you had to express your joy with some measure of wild abandon? At the end of Psalm 23, David declares with a passionate heart, full of love and loyalty, "I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." He loved God with a stubborn love that would not relent, and nowhere will you ever find the word, "Maybe I will dwell in the house of the Lord." David had a heart totally and fully wholly devoted to God. He declared it for all to hear. "I'm staying in his house. I know I make a mess sometimes. I may spill something on the rug. I may knock down the lamps and break expensive stuff. I know I'm a pain." And sometimes he was. "But you'll have to drag me kicking and screaming out of here. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." I love mushroom honey. I love it so very much that 2 to 3 weeks out of every year, I get stupid. I'm not kidding. I love walking around out in the woods. There's just something so amazing to me when I'm out in the woods. I pray, I sing, I worship, I see the beauty of the Lord all around me. And when I find one of those mushrooms, doggone it, I am whooping and hollering and woohoo! We're going to eat good tonight, Gary. I'm so excited. The sun will be setting. It'll be getting dark. And Gary has to drag me kicking and screaming out of the woods. Literally, I do not want to go. Do you feel the same way about the house of the Lord? Do I feel the same way about the house of the Lord? I want you to take time this week to thank God for opening his house to you and loving you through the life, love, and sacrifice of Jesus. I need you to thank God for loving you that much. Next week, we're going to talk about hope for a broken heart, discouraged heart. I love David. I love the Psalms. But this week, find some time, pray, ask God to look at your heart, examine your heart. You may not like what you find in there sometimes. But if we want a heart that pleases to God, if we want to be the apple of God's eye, if we want to be like David, then we need to do that. Thank you.